The galaxy had always relied on its most intelligent species to solve the most complex of problems. For centuries, the great civilizations of the galaxy had coexisted, sharing their knowledge, trading their technologies, and facing their challenges together. The alliance of races, composed of multiple intelligent species, had created a system of education that ensured each race could learn from the best. And when a galactic-wide crisis drill was announced, all the students of the different races were summoned to demonstrate their preparedness in times of unimaginable danger. It was supposed to be a routine drill. A simulation designed to test the reaction of the galaxy's greatest minds in the face of a catastrophic emergency. The simulation was simple. A deadly asteroid had been detected heading toward the galaxy's most vital trade routes. The task was to stop it before it collided with critical infrastructure, a disaster that would cripple the entire region. Every race had students, prepared to perform their duties under pressure. They were selected because they were the brightest minds of their generations, calm under pressure, capable of thinking quickly, and prepared to act without hesitation. All but one group of students. A small classroom on the planet Earth housed a group of human students. Most of the alien students had already launched their simulations, each of them moving frantically across their stations, calculating trajectories, running simulations, and forming complex plans. But the human students? They were asleep. It wasn't an accident. The classroom was quiet, too quiet. The human students lay slouched in their seats, completely unaware, or at least seemingly unaware, of the chaos unfolding just outside their windows. Some of them even snored lightly, oblivious to the distant explosions of simulated asteroid impacts and the blaring alarms. One alien instructor, standing just outside the door, peered into the room, flabbergasted. How could this happen? How could these humans, selected for this critical drill, just sleep through it? Hadn't they been trained for this? The instructor had been briefed, told that humans were incredibly adaptable, resourceful, and resilient, but now, it seemed impossible that these very qualities were lying dormant in the students who were supposed to be the galaxy's next hope. We cannot fail this drill, the instructor muttered to himself. We must push them. We need to get them moving. The alarms blared again, more urgently this time, the sound rising to a crescendo. It was a reminder that the asteroid simulation was not just a test, it was real. The consequences of failure could be catastrophic. It was a race against time. The humans stirred slightly, but no one made a move to respond to the emergency. None of them looked particularly concerned, their faces relaxed and calm as if the stakes didn't matter. Outside, the other species were working tirelessly, plugging away at their terminals, commanding their ships, calculating complex trajectories to intercept the asteroid. They were all frantically racing against time. But the humans slept. The instructor's patience began to thin. There was no time to waste. They would need to be roused, but the moment they woke up, what would they even do? How could humans, so unfamiliar with galactic technology, handle such a sophisticated crisis? Then, as if on cue, the largest of the human students shifted in his seat, stretched out his arms, and yawned loudly. He blinked a few times, looked around, and casually glanced out the window at the chaos unfolding in the distance. The asteroid was mere minutes away from its critical impact point. A massive red mark appeared on the monitor, indicating where the asteroid's trajectory would collide with the trade route. The instructor's heart skipped a beat. Would the students simply sit back and do nothing? Would they continue to ignore the gravity of the situation? But then, something unexpected happened. The student sat up straight, his eyes fully open now. Without any sign of panic, he reached over to his terminal and began typing, his fingers moving quickly and decisively over the keys. The screen lit up with calculations that no one else had thought of. Within moments, he had pinpointed the exact spot where the asteroid could be diverted, using a method that no one had ever considered. No complicated algorithms. No advanced machinery. just a simple solution. And it worked. The instructor, still standing outside the door, could hardly believe his eyes. How could this be? The human had hardly even been awake for a few minutes, yet he had already identified a way to save the entire simulation, and perhaps the galaxy. "Wake up," the instructor shouted, rushing into the room, only to find that more of the humans had begun to stir, their eyes focusing on the situation in a calm, calculated way. No panic. No frenzy. Just action. "I think we can save the route," the student said, looking at his classmates. "It's simple, really. We just need to redirect the asteroid by calculating the gravitational pull from a nearby planet. We've done it before." The others, now wide awake, immediately set to work. They weren't panicked. They weren't stressed. They just got to work, knowing what needed to be done, relying on their instincts, their intuition, and their ability to think on their feet. Meanwhile, the alien students were still running in circles, overwhelmed by the complexity of the problem. They struggled to come up with the right equation. They couldn't think past the high-tech solutions they were so used to. But the humans were different. As the humans continued their work, it became evident that their calmness in the face of a galaxy-threatening crisis was exactly what made them special. What others called a flaw, being able to sleep through danger, was actually their greatest strength. They didn't panic. They didn't overthink. They trusted themselves and their instincts. And, just like that, the asteroid was deflected. The crisis was averted. The instructor stared in disbelief, his jaw slightly slack. How could this be? He had just witnessed a simple solution to a problem that had confounded the galaxy's greatest minds. And in that moment, it became clear, humans, for all their unpredictability and seeming disregard for protocol, had just saved the day. The instructor looked at the human students, who were now sitting back in their seats, seemingly unconcerned. They hadn't even broken a sweat. For them, it was just another problem solved. But for the rest of the galaxy, it was a turning point. A lesson that perhaps, just maybe, it was time to reconsider what greatness truly meant. The humans had no idea how much they had changed the course of galactic history. But as the alarms began to die down, signaling the end of the drill, they realized one thing: the galaxy would never look at them the same way again. The aftermath of the drill echoed in the silence of the galaxy's most prestigious academy. The usual clamor of students and faculty had been replaced by hushed murmurs, whispers of disbelief. The human students, who had once seemed like an afterthought in the grand scheme of things, were now the talk of the academy. Their performance, or lack thereof, had completely rewritten the rules of what was possible. The instructor, still reeling from the shock, stood in front of the human students, unable to hide his astonishment. "I must admit," he said, clearing his throat, "I never thought it possible. I thought for sure, you were doomed. You did the unthinkable. You saved the day in a way no one else could." The students exchanged confused glances. They weren't sure what all the fuss was about. For them, it was just another problem to solve, just another day. But the more they heard the praise, the more it began to sink in: what they had accomplished was something extraordinary. It wasn't just about saving the asteroid, it was about challenging the very way the galaxy approached problem solving. "This is not just a victory for you," the instructor continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a victory for humanity." At first, the students didn't fully understand the weight of his words. The idea that humans could have a significant impact on a galactic scale seemed far-fetched, even to them. After all, humanity had been just a fledgling species in the cosmic hierarchy, small, unimportant, and inexperienced compared to the other galactic races. But as they looked around the room, seeing the expressions of awe from the alien students, it began to dawn on them. What they had just done was more than just solving a simulation, it was a statement to the galaxy: humanity was capable of greatness in ways that couldn't be measured by conventional standards. Outside the classroom, word had spread quickly about the human students' victory. They had disrupted the very fabric of how the galaxy viewed intelligence and problem-solving. Alien scholars, engineers, and leaders all began to take notice of the unusual humans who had slept through the crisis and still managed to save the day with a simple, practical solution. Some of the more traditional races scoffed at the simplicity of the human approach, dismissing it as a fluke. They couldn't fathom how a group of young humans had done what their best minds had failed to achieve. They were skeptical of the method the humans had used. After all, it was based on something they hadn't learned in their high-tech classrooms. It was an old-school solution, one that hadn't involved advanced calculations or complex algorithms. But what the alien races didn't understand was this: humanity's strength didn't come from technology alone. It came from the ability to think outside the box, to trust instinct, and to find simple solutions in the face of overwhelming challenges. The human students had seen the asteroid as just another problem to solve, nothing more, nothing less. While the other students were paralyzed by the complexity of the task, the humans saw it for what it was: a puzzle. And puzzles could be solved with practical, straightforward thinking. As days passed, the human students started to feel the weight of their newfound fame. Other students from various races came to them for advice. They asked for their opinions on everything from solving complex equations to managing crises. Humans, who had once been treated as underdogs, were now being sought after as mentors, their simple yet effective approach to problem-solving respected across the galaxy. But not everyone was pleased with the shift in perception. The alien students, especially those from the more advanced species, began to question their own methods. They had spent their entire lives training for moments like this, relying on their species' advanced technology and highly calculated systems to solve problems. The human students, however, had done the unthinkable: solved a galaxy-threatening crisis with nothing more than a bit of common sense. "Perhaps we've been too focused on complexity," one alien student said, a rare moment of self-reflection passing over him. "Maybe the simple solutions we've overlooked could be the key to saving us all in the future." It was a humbling thought. And it was something that would linger in the minds of the galaxy's brightest minds for years to come. Meanwhile, the human students, though honored, were unsure how to handle all the newfound attention. They were just regular kids, students who had stumbled into an extraordinary situation and somehow managed to succeed. They didn't see themselves as heroes, they saw themselves as ordinary people who had found a way to make things work. In the weeks that followed, the Galactic Council convened to discuss the implications of the humans' actions. Representatives from every major species were present, some eager to embrace the new approach, while others were hesitant, still clinging to their traditional methods. The discussion was heated. Some argued that the simplicity of the human solution was too risky, that it was far too reliant on intuition and gut feelings. Others, however, saw the value in the human way of thinking. They realized that there was something truly remarkable about humanity's ability to adapt, to look at a crisis and not see a mountain too high, but simply another obstacle to overcome. And in the midst of this debate, one thing became clear: the galaxy would never view humanity the same way again. The humans had done something no one expected: they had taken on an impossible task, defied expectations, and come out victorious, not by relying on advanced technologies or years of training, but by simply trusting their instincts. It was a powerful lesson, one that would ripple across the galaxy for generations to come. Humanity's greatness wasn't in the tools they wielded, but in their ability to approach problems with a fresh perspective and a determination to make the impossible possible. But for the students, the lessons had just begun. They hadn't realized it yet, but what they had done in that room was just the beginning of a much larger journey, one that would not only shape their own futures but change the course of galactic history forever. The news of humanity's unprecedented victory spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Galaxies that had once viewed Earth as little more than a speck in the cosmos now saw the humans as a force to be reckoned with. But the human students, though celebrated as heroes, found themselves caught in a whirlwind of both admiration and resentment. The Galactic Council, after much deliberation, decided to call a special session to discuss the implications of the human students' actions. They understood that the galaxy's collective perception of humanity had fundamentally shifted. Yet, as the Council convened, an underlying unease began to settle in. If humanity could solve a crisis so effortlessly, what other unforeseen threats did they pose? What other lessons could they impart? The council chamber was vast, a room filled with leaders, scholars, and military tacticians from the galaxy's most influential species. As the doors slid open, the human students were ushered in, standing at attention as their unprecedented achievements had earned them a place among the galaxy's most esteemed figures. But this wasn't going to be a celebratory meeting, it was going to be a trial. The grand room was filled with the hum of quiet conversation, but when the humans stepped forward, the room fell into an almost uncomfortable silence. Every eye was fixed on them. They had done the impossible, but now they had to face the galaxy's greatest minds and answer the question no one dared to ask out loud: could humanity be trusted? One of the council leaders, an elder of the Crothan race, spoke first, his voice gravely serious. "You humans," he paused, eyeing the students, "have demonstrated remarkable ingenuity. But what if your recklessness in solving this crisis had led to the destruction of an entire sector? Your disregard for procedure, your lack of reliance on advanced technologies, what if that had resulted in disaster?" The students, though intimidated, stood firm. They had no intention of backing down now. They had faced far worse and survived. One of the students, the leader of their group, took a deep breath. "We acted quickly because we saw what needed to be done. We didn't wait for the calculations, we didn't overthink it. We just did it. It wasn't reckless, it was practical." The words came out with quiet but firm conviction. "We didn't just save a sector, we showed that sometimes, thinking outside the box is the only way forward." The council remained silent for a moment, contemplating the gravity of what had just been said. Could the galaxy afford to place its trust in a species so unpredictable, one that did not follow the rigid codes of galactic procedure? But then, a soft voice interrupted the tense silence. It was a young alien diplomat from a previously lesser-known species, a race known for their affinity with nature and ancient wisdom. Her people had always been the peacemakers of the galaxy, believing in balance, both in the environment and in their relations with others. She was curious about the humans' unorthodox ways and approached the situation with an open mind. "I believe," she began, her voice steady but filled with wonder, "that there's more to humanity's solution than mere randomness. You didn't act recklessly. You saw a problem and simplified it. You trusted what your species has done for centuries, working with your hands, solving problems in ways that don't require endless simulations. Perhaps that is what we need to learn. Not everything requires a complex solution." The room was stunned. No one had expected such an insightful comment. The young diplomat's words seemed to speak to the very heart of humanity's strength, the simplicity and pragmatism that had allowed them to survive for so long in a harsh and unforgiving world. One by one, the council members turned their gaze toward the human students. The skepticism was slowly giving way to respect. Even the Crothan elder seemed to soften, his furrowed brow relaxed ever so slightly. Still, not everyone was convinced. Another council member, a stern alien military strategist, interjected. "And what happens when your simplistic solutions aren't enough? What happens when you face a true galactic-scale threat? Will your intuition still be enough, or will you be caught unprepared, like so many others have been in the past?" The tension in the room thickened. It was clear that some were still unsure whether humanity's approach could stand the test of time. The stakes were high, and the galaxy's leaders understood that the fate of entire sectors could depend on their decision. The human students looked at each other, and then one by one, they turned to the council. "It's true," one of them spoke up. "We don't have all the answers. We might not always have the right solution. But what we do have, what humanity has, are the instincts to keep going, to keep adapting, and to never give up when everything seems impossible. The council was silent. For the first time, it seemed as though humanity's place in the galaxy was being reconsidered. Perhaps the galaxy didn't need to change its methods entirely. Perhaps a balance could be found between the advanced technologies of the other races and humanity's straightforward, resourceful way of thinking. Suddenly, the Crothan elder leaned forward. "Perhaps you're right," he said, his voice much less stern now. "Perhaps there is value in combining both the old and the new. Perhaps we have been too rigid in our thinking. Humanity, as unpredictable as it is, might be the key to unlocking a new future for the galaxy." For the first time, the council seemed to reach a consensus. Humanity's strength wasn't just in their ability to think outside the box, it was in their determination, their resilience, and their ability to adapt to any crisis. It was in their ability to face the unknown with courage and a practical mindset, never faltering, always fighting for a solution. The students, though exhausted, finally allowed themselves to breathe. They had passed the ultimate test. The galaxy was beginning to realize that the simple, bold, and brave humanity was more than just a species of survivors, they were visionaries in their own right. As the meeting drew to a close, the young diplomat gave the students a kind smile. "You have much to teach us," she said warmly, "not just about solving problems, but about how to approach the galaxy itself. And that," she added softly, "is a lesson worth remembering." The galaxy was abuzz with the discussions of the recent Galactic Council meeting. Humanity had earned a newfound respect from the galaxy's most powerful species, but respect was one thing, trust was another. The students, who had faced so many challenges and come out victorious, were now faced with a different kind of test. One that would put both their resourcefulness and humanity's future at risk. A few days after the council meeting, the galactic authorities sent a message to the human students. They had been invited to participate in an intergalactic task force, a team of elite beings from various species meant to solve the galaxy's most pressing problems. But there was more to it than a simple invitation. The message was coded, cryptic, and filled with words that hinted at something darker. The message spoke of a mysterious force threatening a peaceful sector of the galaxy, a force that was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. It seemed to defy all understanding, not just in its sheer power but in its method of attack. No one knew its origin, its purpose, or how to stop it. The task force needed the human students because they represented something the galaxy had long abandoned, an unpredictable resourcefulness, a willingness to approach problems from a different angle, something the galaxy's advanced technologies couldn't replicate. The students, excited by the opportunity but wary of the cryptic tone, gathered together to discuss what this new mission meant. They knew they had no choice but to accept. After all, the fate of an entire sector, maybe more, was at stake. But they had no idea what they were about to walk into. As they traveled to the sector in question, the anxiety among them grew. The silence aboard the ship was palpable. There was a growing sense that they weren't just fighting a traditional enemy, they were facing something that challenged everything they had been taught. Upon arriving, they were met by the elite task force. There were beings of all shapes, sizes, and origins, some of them were peaceful philosophers, others cold-blooded strategists. But they all shared one thing in common, a certain skepticism about humanity's abilities. The task force's leader, a seasoned alien tactician named Ralvik, eyed the humans with suspicion. "You may have saved one sector, but this is an entirely different level," he warned. "What we face here cannot be solved with brute force or elementary thinking. This is a puzzle. A riddle wrapped in a mystery." The human students exchanged uneasy glances. They had faced impossible odds before, but this time, something about the tone of Ralvik's words gave them pause. They had been called on for their unique perspective, but what if that perspective wasn't enough? The sector they were tasked with saving was under siege by a powerful, unknown force, a series of rogue satellites orbiting a gas giant that emitted a powerful electromagnetic pulse, paralyzing everything in its path. The damage was already catastrophic. Cities were left without power, ships grounded, and entire fleets immobilized. The satellites seemed to be sentient, almost alive, with no clear means of communication or attack. As the human students began their investigation, they noticed something strange. The rogue satellites, as menacing as they appeared, didn't seem to be attacking in the traditional sense. There was no explosion, no direct warfare. Instead, they simply neutralized everything in their vicinity, rendering all technology useless. The human students realized that the threat wasn't brute force, it was something much more insidious, a technological virus. A plague that spread, but with no clear path to stop it. In their typical straightforward fashion, the students rejected the idea of waiting for the task force's elaborate plans to come to fruition. They were going to solve this, and they weren't going to waste time. The leader of the human group, one of the students who had become known for her quick thinking, decided that the answer lay in one of humanity's oldest survival tactics, adaptability. The alien task force was too focused on finding a complicated technological solution. But the humans, armed with little more than their wits and their inherent understanding of crisis management, chose to think differently. They began testing the satellite systems, trying to find weaknesses that didn't involve using brute force. It took hours, and despite the galaxy's best minds standing behind them, the humans were the first to uncover something no one had thought of before. The virus wasn't as sophisticated as it seemed. It was built on a simple pattern, one that could be tricked. With a risky but brilliant move, the human students devised a way to use the satellite's own electromagnetic pulses against them. They hacked into the satellite systems and created a feedback loop that turned the satellite's own signals into a weapon that disrupted the virus. The satellite's technology, which had paralyzed entire fleets, was now their greatest weapon to stop the rogue threat. The galaxy's task force watched in stunned silence as the humans, with little more than their resourcefulness, managed to bring the situation under control. Within minutes, the rogue satellites were deactivated, and the galaxy's peaceful sector was saved. Ralvik, who had initially doubted humanity's ability to understand the intricacies of such an advanced technological threat, now found himself forced to re-evaluate his earlier dismissal of the human students. They had done the impossible again, this time, not through technological superiority, but through their unique ability to think on their feet and approach problems with a bold, innovative mindset. As the team celebrated their victory, the human students couldn't help but reflect on the lesson they had just learned. In a galaxy filled with endless complexities and technological marvels, the simple, human approach was sometimes the only solution that worked. In the wake of their success, the human students quickly became celebrated throughout the galaxy. They were heralded as heroes, not just for their quick thinking, but for demonstrating something even more profound: the strength of humanity's adaptability in the face of unknown challenges. Yet, for all the praise and admiration, their mission wasn't over. There was still more at stake, and the galaxy's most powerful beings had begun to see the students as both a blessing and a liability. As news of their triumph spread, the students were invited to meet with some of the most influential figures in the galaxy, including leaders from several worlds, and diplomats from races that had long been in conflict. They were becoming symbols of hope, but also tools in a larger political game. The young humans soon realized that their fame had its price. The task force leader, Ralvik, who had been so dismissive of the human students at first, began to take a more personal interest in them. He became something of a mentor, guiding them through the intricacies of galactic diplomacy. Yet, as his praise grew, so did the weight of their expectations. He saw their victory not as a simple win, but as the first step toward humanity's ascension within the galaxy's ranks. It was a pressure none of them were prepared for. But their next test came swiftly, and it wasn't something they could simply solve with ingenuity or quick thinking. This time, the students were tasked with negotiating peace between two warring factions, one of which was a race of towering, stone-skinned creatures that communicated through subsonic frequencies, and the other, a civilization of energy beings whose form was incomprehensible to most humanoid lifeforms. The task seemed impossible from the outset. Humanity, with its rich history of conflict resolution, had been tasked with this negotiation as the final step to proving that their place in the galaxy was not just earned through technical brilliance, but through their fundamental ability to build connections between vastly different species. However, the students soon learned that peace wasn't simply a matter of understanding, it was a test of trust, and it was one they could fail. As they stood between the two factions in a grand diplomatic hall, tensions were high. The stone-skinned creatures were formidable, and their leader, a towering being with granite-colored skin, was known for his short temper and violent tendencies. On the other side, the energy beings, whose bodies shimmered with intense bursts of energy, communicated in an abstract manner, something far beyond human comprehension. To most, it was as if they were trying to negotiate with lightning itself. The human students had spent days studying both races, but what they hadn't expected was the deep animosity and fear that each side had toward the other. The stone-skinned creatures believed that the energy beings were trying to consume them with their volatile bursts of energy, while the energy beings saw the stone-skinned creatures as nothing more than relics of an old, inefficient way of living. Both sides were distrustful of the other's intentions, and the task of negotiating a peace deal now seemed more daunting than ever. The students stood at the center, each one silently processing the situation. One of them, known for her compassion, stepped forward. She didn't have the answers or the solutions. What she had was an unyielding belief that understanding the hearts of these beings was the key to peace. She knew she had to dig deeper, to seek the humanity in both races and find the common ground they had all but forgotten. "Look," she began, her voice steady but calm, "we've all been in conflict. Humanity knows this better than anyone. It's easy to feel threatened when you don't understand something. But that doesn't mean we can't learn from one another." The stone-skinned creatures grumbled, their low vibrations rumbling through the room, a sign of their impatience. But the energy beings, who had been silent up until now, flickered with intrigue. Her words were not just logical, they were an appeal to their shared nature. The human student continued, "The world we come from has faced countless wars, yet we've learned that conflict is not the answer. But it takes more than words. It takes trust. And trust isn't something you demand, it's something you build." With her words, the room grew quieter. For the first time, the students realized that the galaxy's political games were not just about power or technology. They were about trust, the ability to see beyond differences, to believe that peace was possible even when everything seemed against it. The stone-skinned leader spoke first. "And how do we build trust?" His voice rumbled, deep and gravelly, yet there was a hint of uncertainty beneath the surface. The human student took a step forward, meeting his gaze. "By listening. By showing that we're willing to see things from the other side, even when it's difficult. That's how peace is made." Her words seemed to resonate with the stone-skinned creatures, who for the first time in what felt like centuries, paused their aggressive posture. The energy beings, too, began to communicate in their unique, abstract bursts of light and sound. Slowly, they too seemed to soften. The students had unlocked the first crack in the wall of distrust that separated the two factions. The negotiations lasted for hours, but by the end of the day, the unthinkable had happened. The two factions agreed to a ceasefire and began discussions for a peace treaty that would be shared by all involved. The human students had done it again, this time not through ingenuity or technology, but through compassion and the power of connection. But even as they celebrated their success, the students couldn't help but feel a nagging question: was this the true challenge of humanity's place in the galaxy? Was it really about their strength or their adaptability, or was it about their unwavering ability to connect with others, no matter how different they were? And now, as they faced their final mission, this question loomed larger than ever before. The air was thick with tension as the students stood on the precipice of their final mission. Their success in negotiating peace had earned them the respect of many, but it had also made them a target. The galaxy's elite, the same beings who had once mocked their abilities, now saw them as a force to be reckoned with. The students were no longer just participants in a galactic drill, they were symbols of humanity's unexpected strength, its capacity to outthink, outmaneuver, and, most importantly, to inspire. Yet, despite their fame and newfound respect, the task before them was unlike anything they had faced. They had been summoned to a war-torn planet, one on the brink of collapse, where the last remnants of a once mighty civilization were fighting to stave off annihilation. The planet was unstable, plagued by natural disasters, and plagued by a deep-seated hatred between two factions, each determined to claim the remnants of the planet's resources for themselves. The students were given one mission: to save the planet from total destruction. But there was a catch: the planet's fate was tied to an ancient and complex system of technology that had long since fallen into disrepair. A single misstep, a single wrong calculation, and the entire planet would be lost forever. They were told it was a task for the most brilliant minds, the greatest engineers, and the wisest diplomats. The galaxy's most capable leaders and scientists had already failed. They were told this was beyond their reach, a challenge that no one, no race, no individual, had the capacity to solve. And yet, the students, who had only just come into their own, stood at the center of it all, facing the impossible. Their first hours on the planet were filled with chaos. As soon as they arrived, they were greeted by the sound of distant explosions and the sight of crumbling structures. The once thriving cityscape was now a ghost town, with only a few remaining survivors scrambling for shelter. The factions that had once been at odds were now on the verge of complete civil war. One side, a technologically advanced race, wanted to take the planet's resources by force, while the other side, a fiercely proud and independent species, refused to give up the planet without a fight. The tension between the two was palpable, and the students were caught in the middle, trying to mediate, trying to understand, and above all, trying to keep the peace. But peace was a luxury that could not be afforded. The system that powered the planet was failing, crucial components of the technology had become unstable, and the ground beneath their feet was literally shaking as the planet began to fracture. If the students didn't act fast, everything would be lost. But this time, there was no easy solution, no quick thinking that could save the day. This was a test not just of their intellect, but of their humanity. They were thrust into the heart of the planet's crumbling infrastructure, navigating the broken remnants of an ancient system that had long outlived its creators. The machinery was ancient, twisted, and barely functional, a far cry from the sleek, advanced technologies they had been trained to understand. The students knew they couldn't just rely on their ingenuity this time. This challenge required more than just logic, it required heart, teamwork, and trust. They split into teams, each working to repair different sectors of the failing system. Some students focused on stabilizing the infrastructure, others worked to stop the natural disasters that threatened to tear the planet apart, and still others tried to mediate between the factions to prevent an all-out war from erupting in the chaos. Time was running out. The temperature in the city was rising rapidly, and the Earth's surface began to crack and splinter, spewing molten lava into the streets. The sky, once a bright blue, was now an ominous red as the planet's atmosphere began to destabilize. Their mission was becoming an increasingly perilous race against time. But as the hours wore on, the students faced more than just the threat of natural disaster or political conflict. They were also confronted by their own doubts. Could they truly save the planet? Could a group of young humans, without the advanced technology or experience of the galaxy's greatest minds, really solve this crisis? But they held on. They fought through their fears, their frustrations, and their exhaustion. Each time a system failed, they found a way to restore it. Each time a faction threatened to go to war, they found a way to bring them back to the table. They worked together, believing in each other, and, in the end, they learned something crucial. It wasn't just their minds that made them capable of greatness, it was their ability to care for each other, to work as one unit, to unite in the face of overwhelming odds. Then, in a moment of unexpected brilliance, one of the students discovered the key to stabilizing the planet's core, a hidden mechanism buried deep beneath the surface. With one final push, the system was restored, the natural disasters ceased, and the planet's survival was secured. The students had done it. Against all odds, they had saved an entire world. But even more than that, they had done so by showing the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. Not just through strength, but through compassion, unity, and a relentless drive to protect others. As the dust settled on the planet, the students stood amidst the ruins, watching the remnants of what had been a crumbling world slowly come back to life. The sky, once red and stormy, now glowed a soft blue again, and the ground, which had once been cracked and unstable, was finally firm beneath their feet. They had done it. Against all expectations, they had saved the planet. The other factions, their hatred and fears still fresh, looked at the students with new eyes. The once dismissive and arrogant leaders of the galaxy stood in awe of these young humans, students who had been underestimated, written off as too inexperienced, too naive to succeed. Yet it was these same students who had defied all odds and saved the day. But it wasn't just about saving a planet. It wasn't just about being the heroes of the hour. What the students had done in those frantic hours wasn't just a feat of intelligence or bravery. It was a lesson for everyone, especially for those who had looked down upon humanity. The leaders, who had been so sure that the future of the galaxy lay with the old powers, who had believed that only the strongest or the most intelligent could make a difference, now saw a new truth. Humanity was not about individual brilliance or technological superiority, it was about heart. It was about compassion. It was about the will to fight for others, even when the odds seemed impossible. The students had shown them that the greatest strength lay not in what they could do alone, but in how they worked together. They had been willing to fail, to take risks, and, most importantly, to trust in each other when everything seemed uncertain. As the students left the planet, the leaders of the galaxy gathered to discuss what they had witnessed. They spoke in hushed tones, words of respect and admiration passing between them. This wasn't just a story of success. It was a story of growth. Of learning to trust when trust seemed impossible. Of showing compassion when others would have turned away. Of uniting in the face of adversity, no matter how dire the circumstances. One by one, the factions that had been at war began to lay down their weapons, realizing that what had saved the planet wasn't force, but unity. What had saved them all wasn't strength, but understanding. The students, who had once been considered insignificant, had taught the galaxy the most important lesson it could learn, that true power lies not in conquering others, but in coming together for a greater good. As the final spaceship lifted off from the planet, the students looked out of the windows at the horizon, bright, clear, and full of hope. They had done more than complete a galactic drill. They had reshaped the future. They had shown the galaxy what it meant to be human, to be resilient, to be kind, and to fight for what was right, even when no one else believed in you. The lesson was clear: strength is not always what we think it is. Sometimes, the greatest power we have is the ability to care for others, to work together, and to show that humanity, despite all its flaws, is capable of greatness. As they looked at each other, smiling through their exhaustion, they knew one thing for certain: they had just taken their first step in becoming the leaders of tomorrow, not because of their individual skills, but because they had learned the power of unity, compassion, and belief in each other. And in the end, that was the greatest lesson of all.